So what I would love to do now is actually introduce our speaker today. I was thinking about it and I thought, you know what, my introduction can be really short and sweet, but really from the heart. He's our esteemed colleague. Many of us feel fortunate enough to be able to call him a friend. And the town collectively and proudly calls him our first selectman. I'd like you all to please join me in welcoming Michael Tetreau.
Good morning. Just to emphasize one of the points that you look around our country now, this is the age of engagement. People are involved. People are getting more involved in what they care about than ever before. Right? If you don't get involved, they'll get their way. Nobody else is sitting on the sidelines. Everybody else is involved. You need to be out there. Right? So help out yourselves, help out the industry. Make sure you're out there being involved in what you care about and what's important to realtors around the country. With that, thank you for the opportunity to come up and speak today. I'm going to talk a little bit about the state budget, property taxes, and economic development. I've got some handouts that are not, they kind of support my remarks, so you don't have to follow along in those. Those are some copies of articles and blog reports that I've written over time that support what's taking place here. So I'll reference those from time to time, but don't need to follow along. And I'll be happy to answer questions after. I'm going to talk for about 15 minutes. And I'll be happy to answer questions after on the topics I cover or any other questions you have about the town. But to kick things off, the state budget. As you all know, last October, the Assembly finally passed the budget for this year. A couple quick points. One, Fairfield got about 50% less funding in municipal aid than we did the year before. 50% less. Within 30 days of that budget being passed, we were cut another $1 million. We've got less pilot funding today, frankly, than ever before. And pilot funding is pilot, P-I-L-O-T. It stands for payment in lieu of taxes. It's money we were given by the state to make up for the fact that Fairfield U and Sacred Heart, two of our bigger land areas, do not pay property taxes. Now the program started, I don't know how many years ago, let's say 20 years ago, and the state has progressively cut back on pilot each year, and they cut back on it again. So we're getting less money in that category. And this is the same year, we're also losing our tax dollars from the GE sale of Sacred Heart. Because Sacred Heart doesn't pay property taxes. When they took ownership of GE, we lost those tax dollars. So those are a couple of the challenges we have. We've been managing through these cuts with a combination of what I call strategic hiring freezes. That doesn't mean we're not hiring anybody. And one quick example would be, I can identify that, I'm funny on quote. One quick example, we need a mechanic in DPW. We hired him. Why? Because we're holding up on our purchases of new dump trucks and DPW vehicles. So we figure if we've got older vehicles, they're going to break down more often, so we better have a mechanic. So as much as I'm talking about a hiring freeze, I don't mean we're not hiring anybody. But we're definitely slowing down how quickly we replace people. And we're looking at how we can save money through the budget by doing that. We're also holding up on capital projects. Again, trying to be strategic in how we do that. And the goal is in all these to minimize the impact on our residents, but you are seeing, and we'll have seen through the summer and through next summer, a lot less paving going on. Because that's one of the areas we're cutting back. Now, it doesn't mean we never have to do paving, and we will have to catch up at some point. But because these cuts are coming through so quick, we had to make an adjustment for them, and that was the quickest, easiest way to do that. In many respects, well, let's look at a couple other things. Besides the hiring freeze, hold on capital projects, we're also using some of our reserve accounts because our firefighters, when we settled the contract, they took a 0% increase in their first year. We had money put away for that So we can now use that money to help with the budget. Our department heads, the department managers, the key folks in our department, in our town, for running our town and making sure we maintain our service levels, also went without a raise this year to help us out. We, in many respects, are redefining the relationship with the state in terms of what services and funding they provide for things that we do for our town. One, you may have heard of a rental reimbursement program. It's for elderly and disabled. And our residents get about $100 grand a year through that program. When the state passed their budget, they said, we're going to maintain that program. So they sent out $100 grand in checks to the elderly and disabled in our town. Very good. Then they turned to town and said, by the way, we're going to reduce your ECS, your Educational Cost Sharing Fund, by 50 grand to pay for half of that. Now those are the numbers for our town. They did that to everybody. So every town is now paying for half of that. That's the ultimate unfunded mandate. They sent out the checks and reduced our municipal aid to help pay for half of it. There's another program for elderly called the Property Tax Credit Program. Again, for targeted elderly and disabled. Our residents got the benefit of about $414,000 every year for that to help them pay their property tax. What we do is we send out bills with the assessment adjusted for those folks. So we send out the bills in June. They pay us a lower amount, and the state reimburses us for that $414,000. So on June, we sent out the bills with the adjustment. In October, the state told us we're not reimbursing. That's 400 grand that our elderly and disabled kind of have already been given, and the state stopped funding the program. They didn't eliminate the program. And just so everybody's clear, the town will fund both the rental reimbursement and the property tax credit program. We're not going to let our seniors and our elderly down. Right? But it is another unfunded mandate that's been passed on to the state, passed from the state onto the town. In ECS funding, educational cost sharing. That's the money that the state has traditionally funded to all the towns, but including Fairfield. And 2 years ago, we were getting $3.5 million a year, every year, to help fund our program, our education. And that's out of about $160, $170 million that we pay towards education. But $3.5 million is a big number. That's been reduced to $1 million this past year. The state has a constitutional obligation to pay for public education. All right? They are abdicating that responsibility, frankly, and transferring it to the towns. All right? So when I talk about redefining the relationships, those are some of the things going on. The state actually tried to, there was a proposal in to transfer the pension costs, or a component of the pension costs, from the states to the towns. It's the teacher's pension costs. The state had promised years ago to pick up the tab for the teacher's pension costs. It's something that's dealt with at the state level, negotiated at the state level, the town's not involved. The state, frankly, has underfunded that and mismanaged the money. So that obligation has grown more than the state wants to pay. So this past year, they wanted to transfer $9 million of that to Fairfield. That's like a 3.5% tax increase for that number just alone, just that one line item. It's going to grow by over 500% in the next 12 years. So I worked with other first selectmen and mayors. I worked with CCM, the Connecticut Conference of Municipalities, the equivalent to CART, or CTR, to fight that and make sure that didn't happen. And with the help of our state delegation, that was not included in the budget. That's an obligation I firmly believe the state has. If they have problems funding it, then they should fix the program. But in point of fact, Fairfield contributes $260 million. $260 million every year in income tax and state tax to the state. And we expect them to spend it wisely. And if they haven't done that, then they should fix the problem. They shouldn't come back to us and ask us for more money. In essence, we're doing our part. That $260 million is one of the biggest numbers that goes into the state. Fairfield County, as a group, funds almost 50% of the state income tax that they collect throughout the entire state. We are, in essence, Willie, we're in essence the banker for the state. That's where they're getting their money. So when I read that somebody says that the wealthier town should have some skin in the game, I get really upset really fast. We are providing all the money to the state. We need them to spend it wisely. There have been some federal tax law changes. And a number of you have heard about the change in the SALT treatment, state and local taxes, SALT. And there's some questions about the deductions for that. One of the things we're looking at is setting up a charitable trust for the town of Fairfield so that property taxes may still be deductible. I've had our tax attorney look at that. We really need state enabling legislation. We can't do it on our own. The governor actually put it in his proposal. It's one of the few things I like in the governor's proposal. Put it in his proposal. It still needs to be passed by the state before it becomes law and before we can do something effectively there. Two things to keep in mind, and some folks are pointing out that one, the IRS has not ruled on whether something like this would be allowed. All right, there is some question given that they basically base the whole federal tax changes on having this extra money, whether they'll do that. The second thing is even within the current rules on charitable donations, many of you, if you go to a charitable function, you have a nice big fancy dinner, you'll see on there you pay $250 for your ticket, but $50 is not deductible because it goes with the cost of the meal, right? That you can't deduct that because you got services back for that. You got some benefit from that. Well, theoretically, if you're paying your property taxes through a charitable trust, and that's funding town government, you're kind of getting 100% of the benefit from that. So I just want to be fair and let you know, as much as we're working to do this, so if it's possible, we're going to get it done. But I don't want to mislead anybody in saying, hey, it's really going to happen, because there are some serious questions about whether it will be allowed. One of the other things that jumped out at me recently when I was looking at some overall stats for the federal government is that Connecticut is a net donor state to the federal government. We give more money to the federal government than we get back. Now, to some degree, some of that might be okay. We're ranked number 3 in the money per capita, per person, that we give to the federal government. Here's what burns me. We're ranked number 33 per capita in the amount of money we get back. You look at the issues we're having with our transportation, our infrastructure, everything else going on, and the federal government's sending all of our money all over the country and not giving it back to Connecticut. Not exactly fair. 2/3 of the money, 2/3 of this difference is lost because of the federal government has different kinds of grants that they give to towns, states, and counties. How many county governments do we have in Connecticut? None. Not how many counties. How many county governments? 2/3 of the federal aid is handed out to county governments. So I'm working with MetroCog. MetroCog is the Metro Council of Governments. It's our regional planning agency. And what we're doing is applying to the state as an economic distinction, the equivalent of a county government. I want to be clear. That's not a political entity. We're not trying to be a county government. We're not going to be a county government. That's not what this is about. This is about becoming the equivalent of a county government from an economic standpoint so that we can apply for these grants. So we have a chance to bring this money back to the state. Now, there are 9 COGs throughout the state, and we're all kind of working in this regard to help with that. But it's one of the ways we're trying to get some more federal aid back to Connecticut, kind of get our fair share back here in the state. I want to talk a little bit about property taxes and where we stand. That's one of the questions I get asked a lot. So let's talk about that. One, I want to be clear. As much as I just referenced a whole bunch of what might be perceived as negative or challenges that we have, Fairfield's in a very strong financial position. We're one of the few towns that has a AAA rating from the big three, all of the big three, credit rating agencies. Fitch, Standard & Poor's, and Moody's. Our pension fund is 90% funded. We are making 100% of our annual required contribution for OPEB, or retiree medical. I mention those two things because those are two of the big areas you hear all the time at the state level that the state got in trouble for not doing. They didn't fund the pension. Once you get behind the ball in that, behind the 8 ball, it's very hard to recover. All right. We've kept it up. We're continuing to fund it, and that's one of the things that makes Fairfield so strong financially. We have not kicked the can down the road. We are managing our long-term liabilities. In addition to some other things, as we negotiate our union contracts, we're working at decreasing our long-term liabilities by getting the employees to pay more of those costs as we go forward. We also have a strong fund balance reserve, and especially the reason I'm emphasizing some of these things is because as you read articles about other towns in the state, you're going to hear about some of their struggles with this. Certainly as you read about Bridgeport, in Stratford recently talked about having the potential to lay off 40 teachers because of some of the struggles they were having. We are not in that situation. I'll take Fairfield against any other town in the state, given our balance, what we have, our strength, but also our diversity in terms of how we do that. And importantly, with all that going on, Fairfield has the 5th lowest mill rate in Fairfield County. All right, who's lower than us? Westport, Darien, New Canaan, Greenwich. No surprise. So the question I get all the time is how come Westport has a lower mill rate? No. Let me go through. So I went back and looked. I looked back 20 years. And I said, one thought was, hey, Fairfield's always had a higher mill rate. What's the deal? In fact, you go back 20 years, you'll find out that Fairfield's mill rate was about 25 and change. Westport's was 23. So I'm like, right, I'm a politician. So for me, that's about the same. Fast forward 20 years, what's happened? Ours has stayed at 25 and change, but Westport's has gone down to 16 and change. Theirs is 33% lower than ours. I'm like, how'd they do that? So I said, okay, let me look at expenses. What are we spending money on there now? And it turns out their budget, the amount of money they spend, has gone up faster than Fairfield's over that 20 years. That in fact, they spend significantly more in costs per resident or per capita to deliver their town services than Fairfield does. I'm like, that can't work. How's that work? Then I took a look at the grand list. 20 years ago, our grand list was about $4 billion. Westport's was about $3 billion. Fast forward 20 years, and our grand list is about $10.8 billion, so we've gone up. Westport's is about $11.2 billion. So they went from 33% less to bigger. Now, as you pointed out, they're a smaller town, so we've got to fund on our 10.8. We have to fund services for 60,000 people. They have to fund services for about 30,000. We have 30 square miles of land to tax. Westport has 20 square miles of land to tax. So as much as it's smaller, still a lot more land per person to do that. So the key is not that Westport managed their expenses better than us. Their grand list grew faster. And no surprise to all of you, right? They built a whole bunch of $3 million homes. Right? They have the land per person to do that. And if you look at Darien, New Canaan, and Greenwich, same story. Same story. A little bit different for Greenwich because they have a bigger commercial area and they actually grew their commercial piece too. So when we go back and look at Fairfield, let's look at our cost side and realize that one of the top things we sell is our school system, a high quality education. Right? And 65% of our budget goes towards education. 65% of our annual budget goes towards education. However, we're ranked 89th in the state in terms of what we spend per pupil. And if you look at Westport, Darien, New Canaan, and Greenwich, you'll see that they spend a lot more per pupil than we do. Some question whether that's maybe the best measure to use, but it's one that's really widely publicized. I don't have a better one at the moment. And as you well know, it's one of the things that our buyers look at when they're evaluating different towns. What do they spend per pupil as an indication of does the town support a high-quality school system? From an additional cost management standpoint, well, let me cover one more point. Given we're at 89th there, I'm not sure that our goal is to be in the bottom half of the state in terms of how we support education. So I'm not sure, as much as that's a big number on our annual budget, that that's necessarily the place to look for aggressively cutting. Right? We still evaluate it every year, we still have to look, and that doesn't mean there isn't anything that we can't cut. It doesn't mean there isn't anything that we should or shouldn't support. But it does mean we want to be cautious to how we do that, since that's such an important piece of what we're doing. From an overall cost management standpoint, we are looking to cut costs, but we've got to be careful that we don't cut services and we don't cut some of the value that we want from Fairfield. When you think about why you moved here, when you think about why your buyers are moving here, we don't want to cut the reasons, the services, the amenities that they want in terms of what they value in our town. But this past summer, I asked the department heads to go out and talk to 3 other towns in their department. Go talk to 3 other departments, find out what they're doing from a cost standpoint, from a service standpoint, and potentially revenue, and what improvements can we make back here. Let's look at, make sure we're following best practices. How can we improve? And we came up with about $2 million worth of cost reduction and revenue enhancements to help the town, and we're going to be implementing those in the next budget year. We're also looking at sharing services in a couple different ways. One is that we have a 14-town collective effort in terms of negotiating with Wheelabrator on our waste management. So we've basically got 14 towns together, committed to a certain amount of trash that we will commit. And because of that, Fairfield's able to save $400,000 per year on what we're doing. All right? And again, what's powerful about that is that's $400,000 every year. So we are working together with other towns to share services. We also have an initiative underway right now. We're talking with Westport about can we share ECC, or 911 call centers. Right? Can we merge them together? And there's not a lot of cost savings on that right away. There's something of strategic importance. Right now, where's our call center located? Bottom of the police department. You want your 911 call center located in the basement, the flood zone? Nope. So and here's one of the places, as much as Sacred Heart isn't paying property taxes, they did reach out and say, look, we'll be happy to work with you and see whether we can house your ECC center for you in Westport on their GE campus. Rent-free. All right? And because it's GE campus, and because they have an international telecommunications center already set up, a lot of it's plug compatible, and can move right in there, we save some costs on the transfer and the fit up along with that. All right, so we are looking at different ways to save costs on that. And of course, one of the more obvious ones that you've seen all over town is in our efforts on sustainability and the use of solar panels and generating electricity around. Today, we are generating 25% of our electricity needs through solar energy. That's a huge number. In fact, we've almost run out of rooftops, and now you've seen us move to the parking lots in Fairfield Ward and Fairfield Ludlow to put the panels up. And we've got other towns coming down to look at how we did that, what we're doing, to kind of model what we're doing there. Again, the powerful thing about that is that that's money we save every year. It's not just one-time savings. Every year, year in, year out. We save that money, and as we use more electricity, we get more panels up, we'll be even in better shape. One of the keys going forward then is if we look at the cost side of things and realize that cost per services, per capita, cost of services per person, I look at that as a ratio because we can compare that to other towns regardless of their size. And I look at that as a key measure of efficiency. When I was in the private sector, when I was running a distribution company, we looked at something called gross margin dollars per employee. That was our way of saying how productive we were per employee, regardless of what your margin was. You might have a 25% margin or a 5% margin based on the product in your distribution chain. But we looked at that as saying how productive are we relative to other companies. Right? And I look at cost per service as being the same thing in terms of giving us an indication of how efficient we are compared to other towns. And what that comes back to then is that our choice is really to either grow the mill rate or grow the grand list. Grand list. A list of 7 properties in town. And one of the things you hear all the time over the last few years is that what we really need to do is grow our commercial tax base. Right? At least I've heard that a lot. So the question then becomes, let's look at our commercial tax base. 4.5% of our land is owned commercial. Generates 10% of our tax revenue. 4.5%. That's less than Westport. That's less than Greenwich. That's less than, now we're still a town, obviously, because 95% of our land is residential. But let's take a look at then what do we do? So if we want to grow our commercial tax base, I'm going to argue there's really only 2 ways to do that. You either have to grow that 4.5% to 5 or 5.5% or some number like that, or you have to make the commercial land you have more valuable, so it generates more than 10% of your revenue. Now the key to this, because I served on planning and zoning back in the late 90s, right? And you know, anything talked about expanding commercial was like, no, we're not going to do that. The key to that is to make sure it's targeted and strategic. That doesn't mean we expand commercial everywhere. That doesn't mean we increase the value in commercial everywhere. We look at where it's appropriate and where it can help the town. Because we don't want to lose our charm, our character. We don't want to lose our historic districts, our downtown Fairfield, downtown Southport. We don't want to lose our neighborhoods. That's who we are. But it doesn't mean we can't expand elsewhere, and specifically, case in point, something like around the 3rd train station, Kings Highway area, Commerce Drive area. Right? We have a lot of opportunity there to grow and expand. The new trademark building just went in. They're going great guns there. The new OSG medical facility went in. That's an unbelievable facility. In fact, they're changing the way healthcare is distributed. Their goal is to make sure you never go to a hospital. They can do everything right there, including overnight stays. Phenomenal improvement what they're doing. And it's located right there at Fairfield. We've also got some other trends going on, and obviously everybody's heard about millennials. And they're moved to the urban centers, right? Because they want to rent and they want to walk. Well, there's a new wave starting, and we're just starting to see the tip of it, which is as the millennials age, they're getting married, they're having kids, and they're looking for good school systems. So we're starting to see some millennials start to move out back this way, because what we sell throughout Fairfield County is good school systems. And Fairfield has a number of other strategic advantages in this demographic. We have 2 universities, which add to our culture and attractiveness. We also have the few neighborhoods where you can walk to the train, walk to the beach, and walk to downtown. And that's very attractive to this group. And I think that Fairfield, if you think about it, we're really a hybrid. We're not a Stanford, we're not a Norwalk, but we're also not a Reading. We're also not a Trumbull. Right? We do have a downtown. We have become a destination in terms of dining and entertainment, thanks to our restaurants exploding, and FTC, which has done a phenomenal job. And that warehouse they built out is now bringing lots of people into downtown Fairfield. and is a tremendous help. The other thing we're looking at, when I talked a little bit about the new Metro Center, but we've got 3 train stations. And by building out around our train stations, we can take advantage of transit-oriented development, or basically building in areas, and the Metro Center is right for this, building areas where people can walk to the train. So you get less traffic and less congestion, but you still have tremendous flexibility. In fact, it was pointed out to me recently, if you take the Metro Center train to downtown Fairfield, it's like the ticket's $5. Uber's like $9. So it's actually cheaper than Uber. And what you didn't hear me say was that the ride's so short that when you get that $5 ticket, the conductors don't always collect it. So think of that as a $5 monthly experience. So those are some of the things going on. So what do we do about all this? You know, how do we impact this, and what initiatives do we have going on right now? One is our Economic Development Commission completed a long-range plan just last year to talk about what do we need. They surveyed businesses, stakeholders, other key people in town and groups. And so they have a plan underway to look at kind of what things we need to do. One of the keys there is working with our universities so that we're much more strategic in our focus, and how do we look at what they're good at, what curriculums they have, who they're trying to attract, and what businesses we can attract or market to that not only just need university in general, but need what Fairfield U and Sacred Heart are offering. So we're going to continue to do that. Mark Barnhart, our Director of Economic Development, is currently going out, talking to different business leaders and stakeholders in town, and putting together a plan to both attract, but also importantly retain businesses in our town. What can we do better? How do we look at that? How do we get Fairfield out there? In addition, we've joined what's called the Fairfield County 5. That's 5 towns: Greenwich, Stamford, Norwalk, Westport, and Fairfield. We've joined together to market Fairfield County to businesses in the tri-state area. A couple quick things. If you're going to locate in the tri-state area, there isn't a better place than Fairfield County. We've got lower taxes than those other 2 guys. And if you look at our quality of life, I'm going to rate that higher than Westchester and Northern New Jersey. So we're trying to get out there. We've made one presentation in Manhattan already. We're basically pooling our economic development resources, our economic development dollars. It's something that's supported, right from the top. The 5 first selectmen and mayors, as tough as our schedules are, last fall, all 5 of us were in the same room in a hotel in Manhattan making this presentation. So we've got the commitment to do that. And I don't mean to say that we're that elite, we're not going to let anybody else in, but we had to get started. And it's tough enough to get municipal governments to work together that we thought, let's pick 5 towns that are really motivated, that are committed, right? And let's get it off the ground. Let's get it started. So literally in 90 days, we had our first presentation in Manhattan. We're going to do another one this spring. We're looking at other ways to work together to do this. And we'll explain it to make it more Fairfield County. But 2 things that are important that we're doing. One, we're not waiting for the state to do it for us. Second, we don't have county government. So we're in essence fulfilling the role of the county. We're competing against Westchester County when we make these presentations. But we're all represented, and it's an amazing story. You've got 5 towns that are all AAA rated, all have good school systems, all have good quality of life, all have a range of amenities. And it's not any one of us, but it's all of us together. Right? Because one of the problems in Connecticut, one of our strategic issues, is we're a very small state. And then we chop it up to 169 different pieces. Right? In most states, those are called neighborhoods. I was sitting at a CCM conference, and I'm sitting next to on one side is Tony Hart, who's the mayor of New Haven, 120,000, 30,000 people, one of our bigger cities. On the other side of me is the first selectman, and forgive me, I forget the town, 1,500 people. We evacuated more people than that during Storm Sandy. So that's a good, I mean, the issues are different, the needs are different. So we're trying to get around that. We're not waiting to solve that, we're trying to work together because we need to do that for our future. We also have a strategic planning committee going on, forming a strategic plan focused on, what are the guidelines and direction we need for the next 5, 10, 15 years. And our Town Planning and Zoning Commission is going to be playing a very important role in all this. Because when I talk about all this, none of this works if Planning and Zoning Commission is not on board. They control what happens. They have a POCD, Plan of Conservation and Development. That defines what's commercial, what's not, what's allowed. One of the ways we can add value to commercial property, think about this in the metro center area, right? Instead of having a 4-story limit, what if we had a 5, 6, or 7-story limit? Right? That immediately creates financial value, immediately creates a reason to build property there. And all of a sudden, some of if you drive through there now, you see a number of 1-story buildings that can cause some issues. On Kings Highway, one of the thorns in my side and in the neighborhood side for the past year was that Luca Lounge on Kings Highway. Okay, that's 1 story. If you could build a 6-story building there, would it still be 1 story? No, it wouldn't make sense. Somebody come in and buy that and make it a larger property. And we'd get more tax dollars out of it, because we're not getting enough tax dollars out of a 1-story building in that area. So there's tremendous opportunity to build that out. But again, I'm going to say this, I've repeated it several times, I'll say it again, we've got to be strategic and targeted with how we do that. Right? We can't treat every commercial zone the same, we can't treat every area the same. We've got to look at what's the best place for Fairfield to grow, and how do we do that while we maintain our character. So, kind of in summary, we've got some very significant challenges ahead with reduced municipal aid and reduced educational aid from the state. We're in a strong financial position, and probably one of the in better shape than most towns to weather these financial storms. But we need to work together to manage our costs without cutting the services and cutting the value that are the reason we all live in Fairfield. And to control the mill rate growth, we really need to grow our grand list. That's the most productive thing we can do. We can't get there by cutting our costs. And as in a recent Chamber of Commerce meeting, John Trainer, who's an executive vice president for People's Bank, told the crowd that Fairfield is the model for what the state of Connecticut needs to do when we heard everything going on. So that's the direction we want to keep moving in. We've got to do that together. So thank you for letting me talk this morning. If there are any questions, I'll be happy to answer.
Thank you very much for speaking to us. You're extremely knowledgeable, and I love the way you communicate to all of us. It's easy for us to listen to you. I don't know if other realtors are as concerned as I have been with regards to the number of rentals being built, because I don't know if, I know you have a handle on Fairfield, but I recently read that in Norwalk, at the East Norwalk train station, there's the old factory outlet that was there. I think they want to convert those to 250 rentals. Stanford's been doing it for a long time. They were probably the leader of spending money on rentals. Do the rentals value tax-wise? Is there an advantage to a developer to build it as a rental as opposed to condo ownership? I mean, I'm just trying to figure out dollar per dollar, is the town able to negotiate the way that they want to develop the property so that we can somehow get more tax money? I just don't know what the difference is. I'm thinking it's an advantage to the developer at this point.
I think it's, I'll give you my opinion. I'm not sure I have a lot of facts to back up what I'm about to say. One, I think that developers are doing what makes sense in today's market, right? Which is kind of what you expect them to do. Rentals play to the millennial generation. They're not, and you know this, they're not running out trying to buy things. Renting is what they're trying to do. So it kind of works from that standpoint. From a tax dollar standpoint, I want to say we're neutral. I don't have a whole complete analysis to do that, but at some point, it's the value of the building, and then the kind of P&L and what they do on that. So I think from a town standpoint, I haven't heard anybody say we don't want rentals because it's bad for taxes. And a lot of, as you pointed out, some other cities are further along that path. So I'd expect I would have heard it from somebody else if it was. So I don't think relative taxes is an issue. And I think that again, one of the problems in this job is trying to look ahead And you hear articles and stories about everything. Right? So the issue is, which ones of those are real? And which of those are this month's version and next month something else about pop up? So I've heard enough about millennials moving back out of the cities. And I've talked to some millennials that said, yeah, we did that. And we picked Fairfield for these reasons. So I've got anecdotal evidence to go along with some of the articles I've read. The trend is still towards the cities, but we're starting to see that kind of turn back. And it kind of logically makes sense to me that that would happen. In terms of Stanford and Norwalk and some of the things, they've got just much larger populations. Norwalk's about 90,000, about 50% bigger than where Stanford's 120, maybe twice as big as we are. The other thing I'm hearing, and this was from the mayor of Stanford, he talked about the projections because New York is growing. And you've heard about Brooklyn just, growing like crazy. And Queens, all those. They're going to need places for those people to live because they can't build enough housing in the city fast enough going forward. So they're worried about, as they grow, can Connecticut handle some of the overflow? Now, if you said, show me the 5 articles that say, I don't have 5 articles. I have, that's what I heard at one of these meetings, conferences. So that's why some of this is in transitional time. So that would be my answer. And realize that some of that is my projection or speculation. Anything else?
Mike, 2 things. We do see signs of life around the Fairfield Metro Center, but it's not the original project. So I'm wondering from your side if anything is realistically happening there and when. And secondly, a little different topic. You touched on Wheeler, you touched on Westport, Fairfield cooperating. Regionalization is a big topic. There are a number of people in Hartford that think that's the solution to much of our problems. I see that Ansonia and Derby are perhaps combining educational forces, one less superintendent and so forth. Where do you stand on that going the next step?
Let me, okay, 2 questions. First of all, the Metro Center. The Metro Center, the 35 acres right around the train station is owned by BlackRock Development. They've had some ownership issues back and forth over the past couple of years. I'm not 100% sure who is in charge right now. They have gone back and forth on what their plans are to develop that. So I think part of the issue is they don't have the money to really sit down and build it, and they will come. They're kind of waiting to figure out what they can do on that. So that's a concern. But that's also why I don't want to wait for them just around the train station. Let's work on the rest of the area down. Southeastern Fairfield has got tremendous potential and tremendous opportunity to help us grow our grand list as we look at what's taking place in there. And again, that's why I mentioned trademark, OSG, certainly Whole Foods moved in a couple of years ago. The trademark folks are buying the site next door, and they're going to try and expand out into that. So we have a number of things going on within that, which I think is all really good. In terms of the regionalization, yeah, I think that there are a number of, some of the smaller towns you mentioned, Derby, Ansonia, were they 20,000, 10,000 people or something, very small. You could argue they really need to do that. I mean, they should be consolidating a lot more than just that. I sat on a committee for CCM, Connecticut Conference of Municipalities. We looked at 2 things, revenue diversification and shared services. And we call it shared services because regionalization has kind of gotten a bad name in some respects. We developed a whole report. It's called This Report is Different. We looked at different ways that towns could get additional revenue sources that are being done in other states around the country to get us away from just property taxes. All right, that didn't go too far up at the capital because we need the capital to change state statute to allow us to do that. In regionalization, one of the things we asked for, we said, look, if we're going to regionalize, we're going to combine 2 or 3 towns and functions. If we do it the way we did with waste management, it's easy because that's just a purchasing agreement and we can all sign off on that and say everything's okay. But if we're going to do it with labor, right, and 70% of our costs are labor, and we're basically a service business, so if we're going to consolidate services, that means consolidating people. If we're going to consolidate people, that means we've got to negotiate with the unions. One of the things we asked the state to do is pass a state law and says, not do away with collective bargaining, because we're okay with that, but make it so that we only have to negotiate once. Like have the unions pick a coalition or one union negotiate on their behalf, so we can get that done. The state didn't want to do that. So as much as we're working through this with the ECC in Westport, we still have to negotiate with 3 unions to get that done. Now everybody seems to be in favor of it, so I think that's going to happen. But that can take forever if just the negotiation piece if that were 5 or 6. So as much as it's Hartford's talking about regionalization is the way to go, they're not helping us get there. So yes, shared services make sense in a whole lot of areas. We have ECC, we're going to combine 2. That's the first one I think that's been combined in the state. We have about, I don't know, 100, 150 ECC 911 places in the state. How many does California have? 5 for the entire state of California. So yes, we need to do more than that. Yes.
There was a proposal to tax the universities on some level, I don't know, on city level, state level, I don't know what happened. And another question is that if you think the Connecticut is not getting enough share from the federal government, is this fault of our representatives in the Washington? And my third question is that you have proved yourself very successful in Fairfield. Why you are not running for the governor?
There's not a stage big enough for all the guys running for governor. But thank you very much. I'll take that as a compliment. And just to clarify, I am not interested in doing anything else except being first selectman of Fairfield, and my goal will be to get elected again in 2019. But I do appreciate the compliment, if that's a compliment. The universities, the ability to tax them. One of the requests in the CCM proposal was that we were able to negotiate with our universities to get some payment for services that we offer, because they do use police, fire, public works, a lot of our town services. So not that we tax them fully like we do everybody else, but we get some payment on that. That's something that's done in other states already. So it wouldn't be putting our universities at a disadvantage. It's something that's done in other states, but we need the state's authorization to be able to do that. And then your other question?
The federal money they're not getting enough.
Oh, yes. And we will be working with our federal representative. But, you know, we've got 2 senators and I think 4 or 5 state reps. Compared to the 400 and whatever in Congress, that's not always that much. So we need to get everybody on board. And it's not just a Connecticut issue, it's a Northeast issue. A lot of us are donor states. We've been, you know, Colorado didn't build all those highways and those dams in Colorado. We did. Now we need some money back so that we can redo our infrastructure. And so, yes, we'll be working with our federal delegation to raise that issue to a higher level. Any other questions?
Yeah. As regarding the expansion of Sacred Heart, I've noticed that the roads are busier in that area. I don't know whether it's true or not. Do you have any appreciation of how much bigger the new Sacred Heart is than the old GE, for example? I mean, there were about 600 people at GE. How many people are going to be using the building?
I've heard there was as many as 800 people at the old GE, but and that was less than it had been in the past. But I don't have accurate numbers on that, so forgive me on that. In terms of Sacred Heart, they bought this as part of their future expansion. Because if you look at Fairfield, this is the next big piece of land they could get. If it wasn't for this, they really don't have anything to expand onto. So they didn't. Their goal was not to buy it and staff it up and get it operating right away. They're not like a for-profit company. They're not where you'd have to get a certain ROI because you just paid $32 million for this. They basically got that money donated, so they were able to pay the $32 million and develop this over time. It's my understanding now they've moved some administrative functions there. They are doing some university functions there, and they have to do that in order to maintain their tax-exempt status. And they have a shuttle going back and forth. But I haven't tracked it, and I haven't driven those roads on a frequent basis. But they're not using it big just yet. However, Sacred Heart certainly is growing and has been, and it looks like they'll continue to, as Fairfield U is too. So they're both kind of setting records in terms of bringing in new students, that type of thing. So the immediate traffic issue, I would expect it to continue. I expect them to have more shuttles back and forth because not all the students have cars to go back and forth on that. So I haven't noticed that, but I'll check and see what I hear out there doing that. Yes?
Just one quick question regarding the trains. I know that Metro North is raising the fee again, which I've heard from people, it's just,
I think they're doing the public hearings right now.
yeah, it's onerous. But the other thing is it takes longer now than it used to take to get into the city. And I think that's a big problem, because if you can go from the metro station into the city and get there in an hour, wow, that would make a difference in our selling Fairfield versus, why people want to be closer, and I think it's a real problem to, if we can address that and really streamline that corridor, I think it would be a huge benefit to Fairfield. Huge.
I think you're right in so many ways. I mean, think about it. If we made that more productive, then folks would be less likely to drive back and forth. We'd get more cars off the roads, which would help out 95 and help out congestion.
I mean, in so many
The
ways.
challenge, there's a whole number of things involved in that, including the fact that right now, because of maintenance, all 4 tracks that we have, forget whether that's enough or not, all 4 tracks we have are not really working. And if you remember the Metro North crash a few years ago, that took 2 tracks out of action, shut down Metro North. Because all 4 weren't working, and the 2 they shut down were the ones that were working. So for 3 days, we had no Metro North service. So we've got bridge issues that they've got to do, we've got track issues, and safety concerns. You'd like to make sure that if you're taking a train and you actually got where you're going. So yes, that's a major strategic issue. It's one of the topics that we're all talking about. It's one of the ways that towns are working together. That's one of the things that MetroCog, where we speak for 6 different towns, as well as the other council of government groups, are talking together to make sure that we keep that on the forefront of what's taking place. But that's critical in so many ways. They talked a few years ago about getting subway service, where it would maybe shorten the time. And yes, you're right, just for the record, I mean, it took less time 50 years ago to get to New York than it does today. The idea was to have subway service, so every 15 minutes something would come through. So you wouldn't have to worry about the schedule, you just go down and show up. And that was announced almost 4 years ago, and just nothing happened. I was at the press conference when they announced it. I was really excited. I said, wow, that'll make a difference. So we've got a lot of work to do there, but that is one of the key strategic issues for Fairfield County. No question.
Okay.
Yes.
How about one more question, just so we don't hold everybody too long? Go ahead.
The tracks themselves, infrastructures, I mean, when were they built? Early, late 1800s, 1900s? I mean, they're so antiquated that even if you get good trains or you try to change a thing, I mean, is there any state or federal or anything thought about updating it or finding a new way to transport people?
There are a number of proposals out there. I don't think all the tracks are quite that old, though. Certainly the walk bridge in Norwalk is, apparently. A lot of the tracks have been replaced since then, so I don't mean to suggest they're all that old. But I think that safety is a big issue, and we saw that, again, with the crash. That was one of the things we learned out of that. There have been a number of proposals that do we do a highway on top of the highway, on top of 95? Do we do something there? Do we use high-speed bus lines between the train stations? So we can take advantage of some of the road work that's already there, and less capital improvement to run the buses, so there's some interim ways to get from place to place, as well as looking at what we can do on the train side. There's some different things being talked about for that, but I don't know if any of those is far enough along to say, yep, that's a real proposal and very likely to happen. But those are, it's a strategic issue, so it's being looked at from the federal government level, the state government level, we're all trying to work together.
Thank you so much. At this point, this morning, we just have, if you haven't filled out